The good news is, if you remember, President Trump went ahead and said the EDA companies, so Synopsys and Cadence, couldn't ship to China. And then he just recently reversed that. So the good news is it's happened once, and it potentially could happen again. And it may not be that Nvidia can ship the Blackwell chips, but again, this is why we're bullish on Nvidia. The estimates on Wall Street don't have any revenues from China in the models. So if you do get that, that's just upside. And don't forget, the stock is actually trading at a reasonable valuation. It's trading at about a 40 times PE. Remember, the market's at about 24 times, and you've got companies with no growth like Apple, or very minimal growth, growing at 30 times PE. So if you end up with any kind of upside where they can ship a watered-down version of the Blackwell chip to China, that's just upside. And so for me, that's not what I'm counting on in the near term, but it'd be great to get it, obviously.
Oh, okay, so this is good to know, right, that the modeling right now does not account for any revenue from China, which is probably a safe way to play it, right? But to your point, a couple of minutes ago, you're talking about, a pull forward demand, et cetera, and a lot of folks, investors, hoping things are going to turn out a certain way. My thinking is this, right? One of NVIDIA's biggest problems, I think, is if they start to ramp production, build up inventory of this chip, the rules, export rules change. The models may not have accounted for any revenue from China, but he's got a whole. If he ends up with a whole bunch of chips in inventory on the shelves that he can't sell, that's going to be a huge drag.
Yeah, but you got to remember, he's not going to be ramping up those chips at TSMC until he kind of gets the go-ahead. So I wouldn't worry about that. They already learned their lesson, I think, the first time. Don't forget, the original write-down was $5.5 billion. It got lowered to $4.5 billion because they could, take $1 billion of that inventory and repurpose it for other reasons. So that's not something I would concern myself with because, they're not stupid. They've learned from the first time go around, and so I think they're going to wait until they're darn sure that they've got the go-ahead, and then it'll take about a 90-day cycle time to kind of get it through from beginning to end. And so that's not, if they don't get anything, that's not a downside risk. If they get something, that's the upside because that means all the numbers are going to go up. This is not like last year when I was saying be careful, and then you got a big write-down. This is the other side of it, which is you don't have any China revenues in the numbers. And so now it's, if something happens in China, it can only be good if you have zero revenues in the models to begin with.
Okay, I hear you there. Dan, real quickly before you have to go for a break, how are you thinking about the diffusion rules right now? Obviously, the president has changed the game. Where are we now on that?
Well, I think we went from really draconian, where you couldn't even ship EDA tools into China, to now it's, you can sell EDA tools to China. And I think Jensen is absolutely correct, where we want the world addicted to U.S. technology. China's going to develop their own technology. They already were doing it, don't get me wrong. But if you can have people learning in your graduate schools that, hey, we want to use the Nvidia software called CUDA for these AI chips, then that's where you want to be. And so it'll be interesting to see how this evolves over time, but the reversal on the position on EDA tools, I think, is a good start that shows we've gone from the worst outcome possible to maybe we're starting to lighten up. It's kind of like tariffs, right? On April 8th, it looked really, really dire. On April 9th, President Trump said, hey, 90-day reprieve from everybody. And let's face it, since then it's been, here's the date, and then the date gets moved. Well, here's the next date, and then that date gets moved. So I think with the export controls or diffusion rules or whatever you want to call it, you're kind of in the same boat where it's a moving target, but I think it gets better.
And Dan, give us a line on this MP Materials deal because, off the top of my head, I was thinking, geez, better late than never, I guess. But I think it comes down to the economics, does it not? Because when you look under the hood, it wasn't just $400 million that the Pentagon's investing. They're also setting or guaranteeing or subsidizing / guaranteeing a floor price for rare earths now of $100 per kilogram, right? When MP up until over last night was only able to get $50 there for their stuff, and that's one of the reasons why I think ownership has changed hands at least 2-3 times at MP.
Yeah, and I think there's a broader picture here, which is the US may have leverage over China because our consumers are the world's biggest consumers, right? The US economy is 25% of global GDP, but China also has a bunch of cards in that semiconductor production, depending on how you want to think about Taiwan, Taiwan Semiconductor sits right next door to China. And China has made it very clear that they consider Taiwan part of China. And so they've got that, and obviously they have the rare earth um, um, that they can use as a weapon as well, in the sense that they go into our missiles, our cars, a lot of other devices in the US. And so that's the stuff that we need to get in the US, more manufacturing onshore. And I care a lot more about that than whether sneakers come back or, building iPhones. I want to get the things that we can't live without, like rare earth metals or semiconductor manufacturing. I want to have more of that on the US shores because that's vital to US security. And so this
I
is a
would
very important step.
Indeed, I would agree with you because this is strategic, right? But I mean, here's the thing: this Pentagon deal, 400 million. MP itself kicks in 600. So that's a total of about $1 billion. This is all upstream. It's production that's getting the stuff out of the ground. Where China also has a chokehold is downstream in the processing. And I would think, as an investor, we should probably be keeping an eye on names that are involved in that part of the supply chain. I can't think of any right now that are listed. I would expect that a lot of this is going to be private equity. You think, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, this should be the first of many other deals coming, and it's not just going to be this, right? There have been also talk of what's going on in nuclear with uranium, and so I think you're going to see a lot of, and obviously the uranium stuff is more related to what's going on with Russia, and so you've got a lot of things being rethought right now as we go through these negotiations in terms of, well, you might want this from the US, but you're right. Private equity has been involved in a lot of power deals. I think you're going to see them involved with a lot of rare earth metal deals going forward. And there's going to be more of this. And I think this is just the beginning. Obviously, it took everyone by surprise, which is why MP Materials is up 50% today. But I think there's going to be more of this coming down the pipeline.
Dan, I want to get back to something that you brought up a couple of minutes ago, and that is, this is with regards to EDA, chip design software. I mean, one of the quid pro quo items on the agenda that the U.S. agreed to in order to get access to critical minerals from China was, okay, we'll resume exports of our chip design software as well as exports of GE aircraft engines to your commercial plane maker, Comac, right? And, with EDA, you were saying that, look, the whole idea is not to deny them, but to make them dependent on us, whether it's our AI stack or whatever, right? But, I mean, how long is this going to be good for? Because this is just tactical at some stage, right? I mean, the track record is beg, borrow, or steal. They're going to learn how to do it themselves, do it better, and likely do it cheaper in any case. So why should we help them?
Well, here's the thing, Martin. They're going to get there with or without us. Right? If you think back a decade ago, TSMC was far behind Intel. Now they're way ahead of Intel in terms of semiconductor manufacturing. So, and if you look at DeepSeek, there's this old saying of, necessity is the mother of invention. And because we were denying them the latest chips, DeepSeek had to come up with more efficient way of doing things. And their models were way better than the open source models we had in the US. They introduced new techniques like mixture of experts, multi-head latency, distillation, and other things that US companies then started to adopt because it's open source. And so the Chinese are going to continue to develop down this path because much like we don't want them having a stranglehold on us for semiconductor manufacturing or rare earth metals or, whatever you want to pick, they don't want to be dependent on us for things like AI. So they're obviously developing their own models, and they're going to get there. But if they can use the best stuff, which is what we have, versus stuff that's a couple of generations behind, that'll slow them down a little bit. So in a weird way, letting them have access to our chips will slow them down because some of the companies will go, yeah, we could use the chips from Huawei, the Ascend chips that compete with Nvidia, but those are like a couple of generations behind, and we want to beat our competitors, so we'll buy the Nvidia chips instead. That's what will end up happening if you let them have it.
I hear you, Dan. Listen, I'm curious how you think about China and AI post DeepSeek. There's an explosion going on there. We're expecting state credit to be funneled and channeled to that area. It's going to be the new EVs, right? And there's going to be an explosion, and in 5 years, maybe even less, we're going to finally see separate the wheat from the chaff, and maybe half a dozen names, Chinese giants, will emerge in AI. But their business model is incredibly different, right? They're about dominating, about market share. They're not worrying about making money yet, right? So is that going to drive down the cost of AI and commoditize it to the point where hyperscalers are not going to be able to compete at all? Or are we going to start seeing development along two separate and distinct verticals in the U.S. and in China?
Well, remember, the U.S. companies are going to be on the U.S. hyperscalers. The China companies are going to be on the Chinese hyperscalers. But the Chinese hyperscalers right now have a lot of other issues going on. If you look at Baidu, Baidu kind of has the same issues that Google does, which is search is being replaced by people using AI chatbots. And so their search business is under tremendous pressure from that. If you look at Alibaba with their Qwen family of models that they have, which has been adopted by over 90,000 enterprises, customers, you've got an issue there because there's a massive retail competition going on between them, JD, and PDD, and this whole food delivery, quick commerce, there's a price war going on in that sector. And obviously that's the dominant portion of Alibaba's business. And so you've got other things going on with the bigger vendors. And for Tencent, they're focused more, as you would expect, on video generation, just given what they do. And then ByteDance obviously is private, and they're focused more on consumer applications. So all of these companies are going down their own paths, and they're going to keep getting better as we go. As I always tell people, this is the dumbest AI is ever going to be. It's only going to get better from here. And so I think you're going to have two ecosystems where the Chinese companies are going to use the Chinese hyperscalers, the U.S. companies going to use the U.S. hyperscalers. My hope is that those hyperscalers in China are using U.S. chips designed on U.S. EDA software, et cetera. And so that's hopefully where it'll end up.